EU foreign ministers openly support Russia and China. Since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the United States has significantly tightened its encirclement net around China and attempted to bring in more East Asian countries to participate in the suppression of China. Not long ago, the U.S. called on the EU to decouple from China as soon as possible, with the actual intention of cutting off the EU's economic ties with China and turning China into an economic island, but the EU's response took the U.S. by surprise. According to European media reports, at the recent annual meeting of the European Union, EU Foreign Minister Borrell made a speech on the current international situation. In his speech, he said that Europe's prosperity is based on a large amount of cheap Russian energy in China's huge market, which is quite large and has a profound impact on the EU, both in terms of imports, exports, and cheap goods. At the same time, Borrell also expressed his views on the military development of the EU. He believes that Europe should get rid of the United States in defense forces and establish an autonomous defense system. Borrell's statement, apparently contrary to the previous U.S. call for the EU to decouple from China. In Borrell's speech, China and Russia are the basis of Europe's prosperity. If decoupled from these two countries, especially from China, if we decouple from these two countries, especially from China, it is clear that Europe's prosperity will cease to exist. In fact, the leaders of European countries who have recently expressed similar views are not alone in Borrell. German Chancellor Scholz also publicly said not long ago when attending a conference that he would not consider decoupling from China. So how important is China and Russia to Europe? Multiple sources have confirmed that the EU's imports of a small household appliance from China have soared this year, and this gadget is an electric blanket. Data show that the EU imported less than 190,000 electric blankets to China in January of this year. However, in June, the data nearly tripled to more than 520,000. In July, it imported 1.29 million. Overall, in the first 7 months of this year, the EU's import of electric blankets to China basically doubled compared to the same period last year, and according to the current trend, in the rest of the year, the EU's import scale of such goods to China is likely to further increase. Why does the EU want to buy so many electric blankets from China? The reason is very simple, that is, in the case of losing Russia, the largest gas supplier, Europe has not enough gas for the winter. At the same time, the bottoming out of natural gas reserves has sent the price of this energy source soaring, at one point reaching 3 times its previous level. The soaring price of natural gas in Europe has affected not only industrial giants, but also the general population of Europe, especially as winter approaches. Since they can't afford to use natural gas, the European public has to find other options. Therefore, cheap and good electric blankets made in China become a reasonable answer. The German media has published an article saying that Europe can now rely on Russia's energy has been very limited. If this time and then decoupled from China, the European economy will be greatly affected, then Europe may be accelerated into the third world. Europe's development in the past decades and the support of China and Russia cannot be separated. Russia, China, Europe between the establishment of a complete upstream and downstream industrial chain. Germany, for example, has to obtain a lot of cheap energy from Russia to satisfy its own industrial production and supply chain stability, and then process the upstream products obtained from China into high-quality products for export to the rest of the world, with China as the main market. Europe's economic dependence on China is evident in Germany. It can be said that Europe's economy is largely dependent on the Chinese market, and a complete system of industrial chains needs China and Russia. Under the influence of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, Europe and Russia can be said to have almost reached the point of decoupling. The advantage of cheap energy from Russia no longer exists. The Chinese market has become particularly important. If China's supply chain is interrupted again, then the European economy will be in unprecedented difficulties. What's more, for Europe now, the crisis is already imminent. Due to energy shortage, heating the masses in winter will be a big problem, especially in the cold northern Europe, and after decoupling from Russia, Europe has not yet found a suitable energy supplier. If Europe and Russia still cannot properly deal with the differences before the winter, there are only 2 options for Europe. One is if Europe and Russia fail to properly resolve their differences before this winter. There are only two options for Europe: either to import natural gas from other countries at a high price, or to compromise with Russia and regain access to high-quality and low-cost natural gas. For Europe, the latter may be easier to accept, but then, the previous series of sanctions against Russia would become a farce. Looking at the present, Europe has almost lost Russia as a partner. At this time in China and then crossfire will bring unprecedented impact on Europe. Nowadays, Europe's desire for the Chinese market is much greater than China's demand for Europe. China has a huge market of 1.4 billion people, which is an important opportunity for Europe to get out of the economic crisis. China also has the largest scale manufacturing industry with the most complete range of industrial sectors and is able to take advantage of its own industrial chain to provide Europe with the necessary goods needed to maintain production and supply chain integrity. As the impact of the Russia-Ukraine conflict continues to deepen and inflation in Europe reaches unprecedented levels, expanding imports and exports with China can largely alleviate inflationary pressures in Europe and provide some relief to the plight of Europe's people. In recent years, China and Europe's economic and trade exchanges have become more and more frequent. According to Chinese customs statistics, in the first half of 2022, the total value of bilateral trade between China and Central and Eastern European countries was 445.06 billion yuan, an increase of 9.2% over the same period last year. Among them, exports to Central and Eastern Europe were 340.64 billion yuan, an increase of 15.4%. Since 2020, China has replaced the United States as Europe's top trading partner, and the operation of China-European liner has facilitated trade between the two sides. August 21, the total number of China-European liner reached 10,000, 10 days earlier than last year, breaking 10,000. The total number of goods sent this year is 972,000 TEUs, up 5% year-on-year, with a comprehensive heavy container rate of 98.4%. The trade between China and Europe is deepening, and people on both sides can feel the real benefit from it. Especially in the current context of high inflation rate in Europe, the expansion of China-Europe trade brings more benefits to both sides and gives Europe a glimpse of getting out of recession in the context of global economic sluggishness. The relationship between Europe and Russia is already on the verge of collapse, and if Europe decouples from China at this time, it would be like eating rice and breaking the pot. In the next few hours, Europe needs to carefully consider its relationship with China, and if Europe decouples from China again, its own decline will be inevitable, thus accelerating its decline into the Third World. In particular, the recent crisis in Europe has also put the euro in an unprecedented decline. The Fed's continued rate hikes have further prompted the market to abandon the euro and accelerate the shift to the dollar. Next month, the Fed may have to raise interest rates by 50 to 75 basis points. The euro may further face the plight of decline. As the Russian-Ukrainian conflict continues, Europe's investment in the battlefield in Ukraine is also increasing. Large-scale military aid makes the economic plight of European countries worse, coupled with the European military aid to make the Russian-Ukrainian conflict protracted. Many countries in the world have complained about this, and even European officials to visit Africa no reception. In Europe is also a crisis. Europe is already a relatively loose organization, and now the economy is in serious difficulties, internal scattered, and even internal strife. For the dilemma of energy tension, Hungary was the first to come forward and say that the European decision to demand a reduction in the use of natural gas was absurd, and Poland also said it did not accept the sharing of energy within Europe, exposing the internal disunity of Europe now. All these factors make Europe's international status continue to decline. If this decadence continues, Europe is not far from the Third World. But the attitude of some European countries toward China in recent years has gradually changed from pragmatic to vague, and the overall foreign policy of Europe has gradually been kidnapped by the United States. Some European politicians who have come to power in recent years have gradually lost the ability to solve problems on the basis of facts and make decisions and statements that are detrimental to others for the sake of a few votes. And recently, due to the economic recession and development hindrance, the political arena in Europe is becoming more and more unstable, further increasing the possibility of speculative politicians coming to power, and the relationship with China has become an important issue in the election campaign of some countries.